Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone had a wonderful coffee break, and now we're ready to hit the afternoon. We're going to be engaging in a conversation on steel, but I would invite those in the room and those online to participate at askac.org. I have an iPad here that will record whatever questions come in. I'm happy to turn it over. So let me introduce. We have Guido Kerkhoff from Klöckner company, which is a distributor. I'll let you describe yourself. It's a distributor of steel and metal value-added working. And we have Jürgen Großmann, who is a partner at Georgsmarienhütte, which is a leading steel producer in Europe. So we have two different aspects of the steel industry to talk about steel. So, gentlemen, have a seat. Well, I'm going to get started, I think, if I might, with just an open-ended question about the steel industry, various aspects of the steel industry, the parts that you're involved in, the competitiveness of the industry. I mean, steel has been at the center of everything for so long, not just industrialization, but my world is trade policy. It's been at the center of trade policy for decades and decades, and I think that's no more true than it is today, where we have a number of disruptive aspects, I think, that are impacting the steel industry. If I can call them that, you can qualify it differently if you'd like. You have the U.S. significant tariffs on steel and aluminum. You have EU has a safeguard measure against steel from around the world. You have non-market excess capacity coming out of China. You have challenges with a trend towards green steel. Issues of high energy costs. There's this range of factors that are affecting, I think, the competitiveness of the steel industry, and a lot of those have directly to do with trade policy and geoeconomics. So I'm going to start just with an open-ended question to both of you. How are you guys doing?
Well, the trader is in a fortunate position because he can source from anywhere. And let's say his fixed capital is a lot less than that of a producer. The producer, of course, is pretty much dependent upon the closeness of markets and his customers. So we, as a family-owned enterprise, we have 4 electric arc melt shops. We are looking for our customers. The closer, the better. Mm-hmm. So the transatlantic trade for us is for less than about 2% of our production. And it's mainly one product where our customers in the US want us because we virtually have a monopoly in the world. But, we're making steel because we want to make money with it. And if the economic conditions don't allow us to make money, then we have to, in the US, then we have to seek other markets.
I mean, it is very interesting because in my world, the trade world, the 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum is a disaster. It's the sky is falling time on trade policy. You're describing a situation where the steel tariffs, in light of the amount of trade you have with the United States. How big a factor is it? How significant is that then for you?
Well, of course it's significant, but our American customers are pulling our products because they can't get them elsewhere. Mm. And don't forget, we also have a very, very inexpensive dollar at the moment, which is almost as effective a trade barrier as the tariffs.
Yeah. Guido, maybe I can turn to you with the same question.
Well, there's a couple of things around it. I mean, usually we as processor and trader, distribution is just below 20%. But we supply locally. Usually in our industry we say steel doesn't swim, stainless steel swims. Because steel has such a low value in the end product. You talk largely about 600 maybe to 800 euros or dollars per ton, that you want to keep it local. We buy more than 90% always locally. Buying in China is rather speculation. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. The biggest problem we're currently facing, if you take a look in the overall steel industry, is that the capacity that is installed worldwide, largely in China, 2 billion tons overall in the world, is way too much. The demand is kind of 1.4, 1.5 max. So you have an overcapacity, which is largely in China, because they have invested over time. 50% is in China of the whole steel production. That is then trying to get into the world. Usually, you have always had supply and demand in your region, and that makes an awful lot of sense. But the overcapacity in China is bigger than the demand in the US and Europe together. So you can see what amount it is. And that creates problems and the volatility in the prices. And even for us, we don't like volatility. We rather like to see stable developments in the pricing that you can differentiate with what you do with it.
So if you were, I know you're both businessmen and you're used to dealing. You navigate the terrain that is made for you. Faced with this excess non-market capacity in China, I mean, what do you think the solution is for addressing that? How best can that be done? And is it best done in conjunction with the United States, or with the two parties operating independently? How would you see that?
Well, I guess every economic problem is best resolved with the cooperation of the United States. You are the biggest economic power in the world, not necessarily in steel, but in lots of other fields. So, I think
if I can ask some technical, we lost a sponge or something off of the microphone, and maybe.
Well, maybe my voice carries enough.
Oh yeah. Okay, yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, the issue on China is that they build a lot of new capacity, very competitive capacity, but they never took the old capacity out of production because the same arguments as in our countries, employment, local employment, and the new mills did not necessarily were not necessarily erected where the old employment was. So I would estimate that you have about 300 million tons of completely outdated Chinese capacity, which is flooding the markets. This is not, I mean, how are we trying to react on this? We're trying to differentiate ourselves with very high quality products that are tailor-made for the consumer. So, Guido, with all due respect, we try to bypass you and sell directly to the consumer.
Let's try. We can still make a living, but it's, I think...
But not with our steel.
No, we're buying just little from you. But I think the overcapacity has to be addressed where it is, and this is in China, as you rightly said. The Chinese mills are owned either by the provinces or by the state government, so they're not always aligned. That's why they do not get a control of it like in other industries. But that's why, in general, I'm a friend of free trade and having everything open. I don't like tariffs and everything else. I think this is not helpful for creating more efficiency and a wealth for people. But in cases where you have this unfair competition that steel mills can be loss-making and dump it into the markets, I think a protection either by tariffs or by quotas is needed to keep it off and keep the rest alive and keep a fair competition.
And of course, the deal that the United States and the EU struck calls specifically for talk of, I think, free bilateral trade in steel within a tariff quota. And there was also talk about a ring fence, which I think Commissioner Šefčovič mentioned this morning as well, around the two markets. Is that the way forward?
It could be if both sides adhere to it.
Yeah. I think that works, and you have in both. You don't have that many exports from Europe to the US. Again, steel doesn't swim; it makes it too expensive. You have certain qualities like your high-grade stuff, and we have some other stuff we have to import into the US because it's not produced there. We have to be fair. The US steel industry, especially the old mills in the Rust Belt, are among the oldest assets in the world. Put it mildly. They're not really by themselves competitive. They produce at higher cost, lower quality.
Yes, and in addition to that, there is a shortage of capacity for some products that are needed for the further electrification of our
Electrical
industry.
steel is missing.
That's grain-oriented steel. There's only one producer in the US that hasn't modernized its facilities in 40, 50 years.
It's World War II equipment.
Well, a little bit after that.
Yeah.
And I imagine,
Luckily, the World War II didn't last that long.
and I imagine the presence of tariffs is maybe not encouraging the modernization of those facilities.
No, because it keeps revenues artificially high, and it actually favors the traditional producers domestically. So they're making money without seeing the necessity to invest.
And you can see a good example. We're producing transformer cores in Mexico for the US market. They need a lot with all the new data centers they're building. So the whole electrical grid in the US needs refurbishment. So all these transformers, they're sold out for 2 to 3 years. Now the tariffs came on top of that. Customers just have to pay for it. So it just makes it for the US consumer, by the end of the day, more expensive. There is no alternative way of getting a supply short term.
Right. So it sounds like from your perspective, some arrangement where you free up bilateral trade, maybe with the ring fence, that is maybe good for the modernization of the U.S. steel facilities and good for competitiveness of the European industry as well.
True, and then of course the CBAM is another part. I mean, Europe is tightening the emissions rules, and that makes steel production more costly. And when, strange enough, all the steel that comes to Europe from China is definitely those 10% of the Chinese steel that is ecologically acceptable, and nobody can check that and control that.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because in a prior panel, I think one of the panelists who worked in the first Trump administration said, watch developments in CBAM. That's going to be a next big issue in U.S.-EU relations. But picking up on that point, there's another aspect to competitiveness, which actually comes from, of course, the Draghi report on competitiveness and regulatory simplification. And interestingly, I think many aspects of the U.S.-EU deal, there are 3 paragraphs in the U.S.-EU deal that discuss tariffs, and there are about 10 paragraphs that talk about more regulatory barriers and standards-related barriers. And it always seemed that there was maybe a bit of an overlap between the objectives of the Draghi competitiveness report and focus on simplification and some of the measures that the Trump administration might consider unfair. In other words, that the EU could maybe pursue some simplification that would also address these non-tariff barriers. Are there particular aspects of regulation in the EU that would also assist in developing the competitiveness of the European steel industry?
Well, Guido, you have a good overview.
Look, I think the whole issue of steel coming from Europe to the US or from the US to Europe is completely misjudged and has taken a too big role. Yeah. It's small and minor amounts. In the past, producing in Europe and sending it over to the US, especially for high quality grades, made sense. The steel production in Europe, because Europe is better invested than the US, has always been cheaper. Even from the modern mills, if you talk about a Nucor or others, bringing material into Europe has, just from an economical perspective, never been really reasonable. It was always better to keep it in the US and sell it there. So there was no economic reason to do it. Otherwise, there were no barriers of not getting it into Europe. So it just wouldn't make sense. The US prices have always been kind of $100 to $200 higher than in Europe, but that's been for the last 20 years. And it was always needed to keep that protection. And already under Barack Obama, you had tariffs in the US to protect the US steel industry, as the cost effectiveness has never been as high as in other parts of the world. And Germany is not the most efficient steel producer in the world. China's better, and even Russian plants are better than that.
Well, if I may add, one could kind of research the effectiveness of these traditional tariffs and import duties, and you'll find they have not been effective.
No.
Do you? I think you've referenced a bit the issue of newer facilities, sustainable facilities, green steel. do you see measures that encourage trade in sustainable steel, green steel? Would that be a trade policy objective that would maybe contribute to the competitiveness of the European industry and the U.S. industry? I noticed that Guido's chuckling at that, so I
Well, first of all, we sell directly to the consumer, and you find our big consumers, that is the automotive companies or the big tool makers and so on, they become increasingly aware of green certificates. I may add, the German steel industry is still leaning too much on iron ore and coal and the blast furnace. We have a relationship of about 70% blast furnace made and oxygen converter made steel, and only 30% electric arc furnace. Now, one of the most efficiently organized steel companies in the world is Nucor, the market leader in the US, and there the relationship is more than
It's just electric arc.
yeah, just the other way around, yeah. And so I believe that Germany and Europe also may be going the wrong route. We are still sitting on a mountain of scrap. We're exporting 5 million tons of net exporting 5 million tons of scrap, gross 8 million tons, and with that we are exporting traditional historic CO2s. So if we were to use that instead of importing more iron ore, it would help our CO2 balance. But apparently our integrated steel companies, 3 out of 4 are set to produce more sponge iron and go into the electric arc furnace instead of relying more on importing metallic iron, either ferrogusa from Brazil, solid pig iron from the Brazilian wood charcoal furnaces, or direct reduced iron.
Well, I think regarding the green steel and decarbonizing, if we assume for a moment that climate change is real and we have to do something about it, I think steel is way more part of the solution than part of the problem. That might surprise a bit. Why do I think so? 7 to 9%, depending on the countries we're talking about, the carbon emissions are the steel in the country. True. But the volume of steel is largely underestimated because it's so much. If you take it per ton, steel is, if you have blast furnace, around 2.5 to 3 tons per ton. If you're electric arc, you're around a ton, can go down to 700. With DRI, you can reduce 80%, you can go to 400.
Maybe you could spell out what DRI is for the audience.
DRI is hydrogen-based steel production, but you can reduce it by 80%. The cost in the end product doesn't play a role. If you double the steel price, a car only has to increase its price by 1.5%. Steel is cheap. So the cost of the change doesn't matter, but you address 25% of the carbon emissions in the production of a car. It's even if you talk about windmills and other stuff, way higher, and it's cheap. The question of the decarbonization is rather, do we want it and do we do it rather cost-based? Because aluminum, for example, the greenest aluminum you can buy is 4 tons per ton of aluminum. The availability of aluminum is about 1% of the steel production in the world. So it's not a solution. Plastics and other stuff is even worse to recycle. So steel can be part of the solution. And the US, by the way, is well positioned by accident. It was not planned, but in the US, they always hate high investments. So they went for electric arc furnaces and they hit cheap energy, always electricity. And this is, if you have green electricity, 70% of the steel in the US comes from electric arc, you can reduce to 700 kilos. So you can be green very easily, way easier than Europe, based on the blast furnace and the cost base of high electricity cost. So the US is well positioned for the green transformation by accident. But I think, therefore, we rather have to think about this decarbonization, what can help and what is affordable. And decarbonizing steel is A, doable, and B, in the end product, for people affordable. Way more affordable than change from combustion engine to electric cars.
I did invite people to submit questions, and we have literally 10 seconds left. So, but I am going to fulfill that out since I invited it. The Commission has announced there would be a new long-term alternative instrument to steel safeguards. What do you expect this tool will look like? It's a very good question from Emily Kirstens from Global Counsel. Quick, in 0 seconds.
Reducing the volumes that come out of China into all of these markets, be it the US or Europe, are helpful. To get quotas down and limit that, I think would be helpful.
Okay. True, but you know, we have to answer the question: how much of our manufacturing capacity will we relocate to China? And you know, when our customers move to China, the steel production will also be in China. So we have to be competitive with our products. And what you have to give the Chinese credit, they're making some pretty good products. Maybe we taught them.
Well, and Europe was depending on exports. I mean, the German car production is down 40% compared to pre-COVID. It's not going to recover. So the whole value chain behind it has to cut by 40%. That's it.
Okay. Well, let me close with one little remark. I was going to the States about 3 weeks ago, and I was at immigration, and the immigration officer asked me, "What's your line?" My wife was with me, and I said, "Iron and steel." And he said, "Both of you?" I said, "Yes, she irons, I steel." It cost me 1 hour.
Okay. Right to secondary after that, right? Listen, I really want to thank you both for a really fascinating discussion, really interesting. You know, discussing the steel industry, you know, tour d'horizon in 20 minutes was always super ambitious, but I think you guys did a very excellent job of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.